Thank you for joining us. Our show today is a tribute to law enforcement and the leaders in this field worldwide and nationwide who are dedicated to our safety. We are all experiencing a time in history in which social values and responsibility seem to be undermined in an increasingly permissive, politically correct society. Too many people overlook all that we take for granted and all those who are committed to providing us with a safer environment. It is these law enforcement men and women who serve and protect while educating the public with their dedication, respect, courtesy, and integrity. Frankly, in all honesty, what would we do without them? We will discuss this further following these messages.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful. A miracle, oh it was beautiful, magical.
And then they showed me a world where I could be so dependable. Oh, intellectual, cynical.
Find magic again. Sprout by HP. With Intel RealSense technology inside, now you can bend the rules of creativity outside.
With us now is Assistant Chief Shawn Backer. A real pleasure and honor to be with you, sir.
Pleasure's mine, sir. Thank you.
I'd like to begin by saying that we are living in a strange time in history where there's so many opportunities for progress in so many areas of technology, yet this complacency and a lack of respect that should exist and a lack of responsibility, in my view, on the part of citizens all over the world and, unfortunately, here in the United States and right here in the city of Coral Springs as well, I believe. What are your thoughts on that fact, actually?
Well, it is interesting. As someone that was working here, you know, when the tragedy of September 11th struck and I saw the outpouring of support for law enforcement, we couldn't walk anywhere in the community without people stopping to thank us for our service. The images of law enforcement and fire rushing into those buildings and people's comprehension of the willingness to pay the ultimate sacrifice for their safety, I think was a pinnacle for law enforcement. And you saw people flocking to become cops. They wanted to work with us. They wanted to shake our hands. And you felt super appreciated. It has certainly come full circle right now when you see some of the current events that have taken place, when you see some of the media portrayals of law enforcement. I would certainly say that some of them have been sensationalized to some extent, and they've portrayed law enforcement in a very negative way. And you know, we're just a little bit from that 20-year anniversary of September 11th, and to see how far the pendulum has swung is frustrating, but I don't think all hope is lost in that regard. I think you're starting to see a push, even from the academic world, to really look at the data and understand what's taking place. Just this week, the Florida police chiefs released a report that talked about the level of criminality that drug offenders had prior to actually receiving any significant prison sentences. And this was specifically done to debunk the notion or myth that's been perpetuated that these are nonviolent first-time offenders just being locked up in droves. So I think what you'll see over the next couple of years is we'll probably return back to center with some level of normalcy and understanding that law enforcement is a tough job, but it's a very necessary job. You'll start to see people develop a little bit more respect for the work we're doing when some of these facts and data come out, when you have the media start to push some of the good things that we do. We're in the community, particularly here at Coral Springs, a lot. We do a lot of community engagement. We do a lot of things to help our underserved community. We do that because we're fully invested in our community, not because we're trying to counter some media message. We were doing this long before the media started to, be as critical of law enforcement. So I think you'll see the pendulum, come back to the middle here in the very near future.
Well, that's essential, and I think it's absolutely an outrage how activities by people all over the country have perpetrated crimes against law enforcement. I'm thinking of officers in New York being attacked and splashed with water, and officers shot in the head as they are parked in a car. I mean, this is absolutely insane, and we are dependent upon law enforcement to protect our ways of life and all good people.
Yeah, I agree. It's a frustrating time, and it's a frustrating set of circumstances to watch. But I would tell you, Richard, I do think to some extent there have been moments where law enforcement hasn't helped that either. I don't think we've done a good enough job of advertising and letting the community know all the things that we're doing to engage them, to help them to be a part of that community. There's also been some instances where the law enforcement actions help to fuel some of those conspiracy theories. When I started the police academy many years ago, the director of the academy walked in, and it was a very profound thing. He walked in on the first day. He never introduced himself. He didn't have a bunch of warm words. He walked in and he said, "If you do not have your word, you cannot do this job. If you do not have your word, you can't do this job." The people have to know that we're honest, ethical, and that we are legitimate. We're a part of their community. We have their best interests in heart. And that's super important.
Sir, I fully agree with you, and it is really so essential for people to interact, get along, and respect each other's background and culture, and all be basically, I would say, recognizing that they are citizens of this great country and assimilate and accept the values. And we have to just to be proud of the fact that we're here and abide by the rules, accept each other, and so forth. I met you a while back at this Hanukkah event, and it makes me wonder a little bit about the fact that we have different communities. We have a Latin community, the Jewish community in the city, and it's a perfect example of the integration and cooperation of different cultures. What are your thoughts with regard to that?
Well, I think having all the different cultures and the diverse backgrounds in the city, that's the quintessential example of what America was supposed to be. It's a melting pot. I think Coral Springs personifies that. We're a melting pot with every demographic, every religion, every walk of life represented here in our community. And what we've done, the Coral Springs Police Department, is we've tried to make sure that our police force is representative of that. So we have constantly been looking at and evaluating our hiring practices, our recruitment strategies. We have to make sure that we've got officers that can relate and understand what's going on in all of the different areas of our community.
Very important. You mentioned 9/11, and that brought to mind the very sad, horrific fact that these terrorists, these criminals, were training in Pembroke Pines. I was talking to Chief Justino. They actually trained to fly planes, the 9/11 terrorist attacks right here in South Florida.
One of those terrorists actually lived in Coral Springs.
Huh. Wow. One needs to know more about the people, I guess, and be vigilant and weed out the bad apples, I guess, and keep an eye on them, perhaps.
I agree with that, and I think the way law enforcement has approached intelligence and intelligence sharing has improved dramatically since that horrific event. You have task force at international and national levels with local law enforcement attached to these various entities. And when there's a threat, we're aware of it in real time, and we're able to address it and assist our federal partners to make sure that our communities are safe.
Again, what comes to mind is what happened further up north, the attacks on synagogues and observant or religious Jews being murdered, a rabbi in North Miami just shot on the sidewalk. Do you feel that there is a definite rise in anti-Semitism in our culture today?
It certainly seems like we're seeing a rise in hate across a lot of boundaries right now. Anti-Semitism does seem to be something that's coming to the forefront more than you had seen in recent years. But I think it's a little bit of a byproduct of really what we're seeing across our country in total, in that there's just a level of divisiveness like we've never seen before.
Isn't that interesting? I've never experienced or seen the extent of irrational, excessive hatred between different political parties here at the current time. I mean, the vilification. I had the honor again of interviewing Alan Dershowitz, who is a registered Democrat, and he had the courage just to speak his mind with regard to constitutional law. And friends have disowned him, criticized him for saying what he believes the Constitution represents. And it's just astonishing to me, this increased hostility.
Yeah, I don't think that's what our founding fathers intended. I think they were, well ahead of their time in crafting a Constitution and a Bill of Rights that was meant to evolve to, I think, avoid our culture getting to this point where you're starting to see like these silos of, if you're not in this community or this community or this community, and there doesn't seem to be that transcendent leader that's able to walk across these boundaries and find commonalities between everybody and unify us. It would be really inspiring to see somebody step up and exhibit that level of leadership.
Absolutely, yes. On that happy thought, I'd like just to go to a commercial break. Sir, we'll be right back following these messages. We're back with Assistant Chief Shawn Backer. Sir, I heard that this police department just issued its 60-second risk protection order. Share with our audience what that is.
Yeah, if you could indulge me for a second, let me just go back a little bit further and kind of tie the whole thing together. In Coral Springs, we've been committed to providing a very safe environment in our schools, and this is long before the MSD tragedy. We've got a school resource officer, sometimes two, in every school. We go to great lengths to ensure that our officers are developing relationships with the students in our community in hopes that that's going to help build bridges going forward. After the MSD tragedy with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act that passed, one of the components that was in there was the creation of these ex parte risk protection orders. And they're basically injunctions if we believe somebody is a danger to themselves or others and they have access to a weapon, we can petition a judge to have the weapons confiscated in order to make our community safe. A lot of times these risk protection orders, the impetus behind us seeking them, comes from some of these social media threats that kids are making. You get a lot of these copycat kids that think it's funny to mock or make fun of what happened, with the tragedy up in Parkland, and it's abhorrent. It shouldn't be taking place. In our community here, the Coral Springs Police Department, we've been committed to investigating those long before that tragedy. We do everything in our power to identify where that social media post came from, and if necessary, evaluate and file for a risk protection order in order to ensure that these subjects who may be a danger to our community do not have access to weapons. And we've been very successful, and we think it's helped to make our community safer.
I'm sure people would criticize me for what I'm going to say now. I think that in a world that is so troubled with so much irresponsibility and savage inhumanity, I think there are certain liberties that need to be kind of looked into more closely. I think it's a jolly good idea to keep an eye on people's social media activity, and I have no problem with that at all. And those who scream that no, it's an infringement on their privacy, I say nonsense. In this world, we need the protection. That's just me, though.
I will tell you that the impetus for a lot of these investigations is from the courageous children and their families in our community. When they're made aware of these social media threats, they are bringing them forward to us. Obviously, we're not in a position in our community to say it can't happen here, because it did. So our kids have shown a lot of resiliency and courage in bringing them forward, and we're holding up our end of the bargain, investigating them fully. Usually within an hour or two, we're in the homes of these folks that have posted these threats. So, obviously my message and my thought is, it's not funny. Don't post this stuff as a joke. It's not taken lightly by us. But conversely, if you're posting them because you are having suicidal thoughts or ideations of attacking people, please ask for help. We're here. We can get resources to you. We don't want to see anybody in our community get hurt.
So what more can be done to instill respect for the law and cooperation with the law enforcement officers, who essentially are basically the champions around us on every corner, keeping people safe?
Well, what I would say is I go back to our school resource program. When you look at our community, we have had a school resource officer in the elementary schools for well over a decade. If we are waiting until the children are towards the end of middle school or even in high school to introduce ourselves to them and develop that relationship and foster that respectful environment, I think you're probably too late. Keeping in mind that with our school resource officers at the elementary level, we have them participate in the events that take place at their school, so there's a lot of interaction with the families. They're there at arrival, dismissal. They become a part of the fabric and culture and family of these schools. And I think that's a sound tactic and strategy, for introducing ourselves and developing that mutual respect.
So, changing subjects, I'd like to ask you about the challenge that drugs and the opioids represent in tarnishing and damaging our society.
That's a great question, Richard. It's something that even our community has not been immune to. This opioid epidemic is, pervasive. It's everywhere throughout the country. It doesn't matter whether you're a man, a female. It doesn't care your race, your sexual orientation. It doesn't care about your religion. We've been in Eagle Trace and overdoses, and we've been in some of our more underserved communities, dealing with overdoses. And it is something that, we've had a very concerted effort at addressing in a multi-pronged approach. We've certainly tasked our narcotics unit with, making this a priority, but we've also engaged in a educational campaign. Former Commissioner Lou Samaglia from Coral Springs had approached us, looking for more information on this topic, and from that we started the Opioid Task Force, which at one point I wound up chairing for the city. There is a webpage on the city's website devoted to this and the educational campaign that we did. What was really interesting, and it kind of debunked some misconceptions about opioid addicts, what my research had found was that upwards of 80% of opioid addicts had actually begun as sports-related injuries. They had been prescribed opioid-based medications and wound up getting hooked. However, at some point the pills become very cost prohibitive, and a lot of these folks will seek alternatives at the street level. And that's kind of been the pathology of how some of these opioid addicts come to be. So we had an educational campaign that we came up with. Our marketing team for the city did a fantastic job. We used a student from the charter school who's a soccer athlete, ironically soccer being one of the major culprits for sports-related injuries. And we came up with a video that showed kind of the path that somebody would transcend from being happy and healthy to getting injured, and then moving into those street level opioid uses and the potential for overdose that exists. And what I think is also important in addition to the education is to let people know, and at least this is my opinion, when you have a drug addict living with you, that is not a victimless crime. The families of these addicts suffer with them, whether that's the emotional toll, the physical toll, or even a financial toll. A lot of these families will go to great lengths to get their loved ones into treatment facilities and rehab, and they'll try anything to get them clean and sober. So the families are negatively impacted by these drug addictions, as well as the addict. So it's a big problem. Again, I do see the tide, I think, hopefully moving in the right direction. I think there is a lot of education out there. There are a lot of support services, not only through our task force. There's links to resources that are out there, but through the county, there's other resources that are available as well.
And of course, it is a national tragedy. It is a national tragedy. What actually are the greatest challenges facing law enforcement, in your view?
In my opinion, one of the biggest challenges we have going forward is hiring of police officers. And I'm talking about finding quality, intelligent, mature, problem-solving adults that want to do this job, that understand what they're getting into, that are willing to face the emotional tolls of what they're going to see over a 20 or 25-year career. Recruiting, hiring, and then retaining these folks, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges for law enforcement going forward.
Well, I think it's a great honor for any individual who chooses to serve, and a pleasure and honor to meet you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
I'll be right back. With us now is State Attorney Mike Satz. A pleasure to have you back on the show, sir.
Always good to see you.
We are witnessing interesting times in history, but law enforcement remains a priority in our civilization in general. What's new in law enforcement?
Well, there's a lot of things, as you mentioned, going on. It's a question, and there seems to be a lack of trust between law enforcement and our communities. And that's something we have to do something about. We've been working on it, and there's a lot more to be done. That trust has to be reinstated. It's so important for the safety and the welfare and the quality of life of all our citizens in this country.
How nice it would be if there were programs implemented that would encourage young people to do some compulsory annual service where they would help in old age homes, orphanages, pick up litter from the streets and just get a feel a little bit, a week at a time, of what it's like to have, to be part of society. Such a program, I think, would contribute enormously to the values of individuals if they actually had a hands-on experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that any experience a young person has, that's a good experience, a positive experience, helps them, in life. And community service is always a good thing. Staying in school, education is so important. Just talking about some of the things you mentioned about, values. When you have an opportunity to get a good education and an opportunity to exceed, you see biases and prejudice disappear, because that's what, in my opinion, what bigotry is. It's a lack of knowledge of how other people are and how they lead their lives. I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Sir, if I may ask you, what are your plans for the future?
Well, right now I'm running for re-election, so hopefully I'll be here for a while. I think this job is very important. I think you need somebody that has a lot of experience and has performed well. I think the people who work here have a lot of experience and have performed well. I really enjoy working with the people that I work with and have worked with in the past. We do a lot of good things to protect the community and help to enhance the quality of life. I think it's something that has a great purpose, and I want to be part of that purpose.
It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show again,
Always
sir.
good to see you, sir.
And it is wonderful that we have dedicated individuals and leaders such as yourself in this essential role.
Thank you.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream, with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
This brings us to the end of the show for today. I'm Paul Peritz. Thank you for being with us.